You wake up at 3:07 am. No alarm, no loud noise. Your eyes just open. You glance at the clock, and almost immediately your brain decides this is the perfect time to become a full-time detective. Was that chest pain earlier normal? Did you send that awkward text? Why does your left knee suddenly feel suspicious? 5 minutes later, you've mentally diagnosed yourself with stress, insomnia, and at least one rare disease you definitely shouldn't have Googled at 2 a.m. Not exactly a productive use of the night. But here's the thing. What if nothing is wrong with you? What if waking up in the middle of the night isn't a glitch? What if it's a feature? Because for most of human history, sleeping straight through the night wasn't normal at all. And that's where this story begins. Not in a bedroom, not in a hospital, not in a sleep clinic, but beside a fire. Imagine you're sitting in the darkness 50,000 years ago. No phone, no street lights, no locked doors, no comforting little green light from a Wi-Fi router. Just a small circle of firelight surrounded by miles of darkness. And somewhere beyond that darkness, something is moving. Maybe it's the wind, maybe it's a hyena, and the difference matters a lot. When the sun went down for your ancestors, the day didn't end. An entirely different world began. A world filled with predators, stories, strange sleeping habits, and survival instincts that are still running inside your brain right now. That last part isn't a metaphor, it's biology. And by the end of this video, you'll see your own nighttime habits differently. The way you sleep, the way you wake up, even the reason you sometimes stare at the ceiling at 3 a.m. wondering why you're awake. If you enjoy exploring the strange ways the ancient world still lives inside modern humans, hit subscribe and join us. Because this story gets much stranger. And maybe the most advanced thing in your bedroom isn't your phone. It might be a Stone Age brain that never completely adapted to the modern world. Buckle up, let's go. Now let's go back, roughly 300,000 years, long before cities, long before farming, long before anyone had opinions about mattress firmness. Fossils from Jebel Irhoud in Morocco show that early Homo sapiens were already walking the earth. They look surprisingly like you. Same hands, same eyes, same brain. Very different nights. Because when the sun disappeared, the world didn't just get darker, it got dangerous, fast. Here's something most people don't think about. Humans have genuinely terrible night vision. Compared to the things hunting us, we were practically blind. Lions, leopards, hyenas, all of them built for low light conditions. All of them most active after sunset. Behavioral studies of African lions show that hunting peaks after dark, which means something uncomfortable. When darkness arrived, your ancestors stopped being the hunters and became the hunted. Not a promotion. So what did they do? They got smart about it. Archaeological sites like Shanidar Cave in present-day Iraq show that humans repeatedly returned to the same protected shelters over thousands of years. Not because caves were comfortable. They weren't. Cold, damp, absolutely terrible real estate. But they offered something no open field could. Predictability. One entrance, one direction to watch, one direction danger could come from. Think of it as the world's first security system. No cameras, no motion sensors, just rock walls and one very stressful doorway. And here's what made it work. Nobody slept alone. Anthropologist Carol Worthman found that for most of human history, people slept in groups. Families together, children together, entire communities within earshot of each other. Not because they were particularly fond of each other's sleeping habits, but because a group doesn't just create warmth, it creates awareness. Someone stirs, someone hears something, someone notices. That one light sleeper in the group wasn't annoying. They were the alarm system. Safety wasn't something you carried, it was something you built together, every single night. And here's the reframe. Ancient humans weren't afraid of the dark because they were superstitious. They were afraid because the dark contained real things that wanted to eat them. That's not a metaphor either. But fear alone doesn't explain everything. Because if the night was this dangerous, why didn't humans simply hide until sunrise? Why did they eventually stay awake? Talk? Laugh? Tell stories? That answer begins in South Africa, specifically in Wonderwork Cave, a massive cave on the edge of the Kalahari Desert. In 2012, archaeologist Francesco Berna and his team published evidence of burned bone and ash found deep inside the cave. Not near the entrance, deep inside. Which rules out a natural wildfire blowing through. Someone carried fire in and kept it alive 1 million years ago. Let that sit for a second. 1 million years ago, humans were already doing something most animals still can't do today. They were controlling fire. Not just using it, controlling it. And that changes everything. Here's why. Before fire, darkness belonged to predators. After fire, darkness became negotiable. A leopard might be faster than you, a hyena might be stronger than you, but neither one enjoys walking into a wall of flames. Which turns out to be a surprisingly effective security policy. No passwords required, no monthly subscription fee, just fire. Now imagine the scene. The sun drops below the horizon, temperature falls, the sounds of the night begin. But this time, something is different. A small circle of orange light flickers against the cave wall, and for the first time in human history, people can see each other after sunset. Not shadows, not outlines, actual faces, expressions, reactions. Think about what that means. For hundreds of thousands of years before this, night meant isolation. You heard the people next to you, you felt them, but you couldn't see them. Fire changed that. And most people assume fire's greatest gift was cooking. Cooking was important, genuinely important. But anthropologist Richard Wrangham has argued that fire transformed something even bigger than food. It transformed time itself. Here's the mechanism. Fire reduced predation risk. Less danger meant less vigilance. Less vigilance meant more waking hours. More waking hours meant more social interaction. That chain reaction sounds simple, but the consequences were enormous. For the first time in human history, there were hours that weren't entirely devoted to survival. Hours to sit, hours to watch, hours to think, hours to just exist without something trying to kill you. You could argue that fire invented the evening, and honestly, that's not an exaggeration. Because once people stopped spending every second trying not to become dinner, something completely unexpected happened. They sat around the fire and started doing something that looks, from the outside, completely useless. They told stories. Which raises a much bigger question. Why would a species barely surviving spend its precious nighttime hours talking about things that weren't even real? Why stories? Why then? Why at all? And this is where the story takes a strange turn. Because once humans had fire, they didn't spend every evening planning hunts, or sharpening tools, or quietly reflecting on their life choices. Instead, they told stories. We know this because of anthropologist Polly Wiesner, who spent years living alongside the Juhwansi people of the Kalahari Desert in southern Africa. What she found was remarkable. During the day, roughly 80% of conversations were practical. Who found food? Who was hunting where? Who needed help? The ancient version of your Monday morning inbox. At night, everything flipped. Around 81% of campfire conversations became stories, not logistics, not planning, stories. A species barely surviving spent most of its evening talking about people who weren't there, animals that weren't there, and events that may never have happened at all. From a pure survival standpoint, that sounds like a waste of time, until you look closer. Imagine the scene. An older woman sits beside the fire. A child leans forward. Everyone else goes quiet. The flames crackle. The darkness waits just beyond the light, and the story begins. Maybe it's about a hunter who ignored a warning and paid for it. Maybe it's about someone clever who survived because they paid attention. Maybe it's about ancestors, spirits, heroes, or something that went wrong on a hunt 3 winters ago. Different characters, same lesson. Here's the mechanism. Stories compress information in a way nothing else can. Instead of learning from your own mistakes, you learn from someone else's. A 10-minute story can transfer years of hard-earned experience. That's not entertainment. That's the most efficient knowledge transfer system humans ever invented. And our brains are literally wired for it. Neuroscientists have found that narrative activates multiple brain regions simultaneously. Motor cortex, sensory cortex, emotional processing centers, all firing together, making story-delivered information far easier to remember than raw facts alone. Think about that for a second. Every documentary you've ever watched, every podcast you listened to on a commute, every book that genuinely changed how you think, all of it is just campfire storytelling with better production value. The technology changed, the mechanism never did, and the chain reaction that started around those fires is easy to underestimate. Story creates memory. Memory becomes culture. Culture builds identity. Identity makes civilization possible. Archaeologists at Blombos Cave in South Africa found engraved geometric symbols dating back more than 70,000 years. Evidence that humans were already thinking symbolically, already creating meaning, long before cities existed, long before anyone thought to write any of this down. Here's the reframe. Maybe civilization didn't begin when humans planted the first crops. Maybe it began when someone sat beside a fire and said, "Let me tell you what happened." Because fields can feed a body, but stories can feed an entire culture. So fire protected the night, and stories filled it. But there's one more thing your ancestors did after dark that almost nobody talks about. Something that explains a lot about why you're sometimes wide awake at 3 a.m. staring at your ceiling. And it has nothing to do with stress. But here's where the story gets even stranger. Because what ancient humans did before sleep is fascinating. What they did during sleep is even more surprising. Most of us carry the same assumption. You go to bed, you sleep 8 straight hours, you wake up. Simple, natural, obviously correct. Except it isn't. Historian Roger Ekirch spent 16 years going through old diaries, court records, medical texts, household documents, and personal letters from across Europe and beyond. Thousands of documents, spanning centuries, and he kept finding the same thing, over and over again. People referred to a first sleep and a second sleep, not as something unusual, not as a problem, as something completely ordinary, like mentioning breakfast. For hundreds of years, across multiple cultures, people routinely slept in 2 separate shifts with a waking period in between. First sleep lasted roughly 3 to 4 hours. Then they woke up, not in a panic, not anxious, just awake, calm and clear-headed in a way that felt completely natural. They stayed up for an hour or two, then drifted back to sleep until morning. That was the rhythm. Now imagine the scene. The fire burns low. Most of the group is asleep. Then someone opens their eyes. No alarm pulled them out. No notification. No reason except that their body simply decided it was time. They add another piece of wood to the fire, check on a child, look up at the stars through the cave opening. Maybe talk quietly with whoever else is awake. Maybe just sit there in the dark and think. Then, an hour later, they close their eyes again. First sleep, quiet waking period. Second sleep. That was a normal night for most of human history. Here's the mechanism. Without artificial light stretching the evening, the brain responds differently to darkness. Melatonin releases earlier, sleep pressure builds faster, and the body naturally divides rest into 2 phases, rather than forcing everything into one long compressed block. In other words, the 8-hour sleep we treat as a biological standard isn't ancient at all. It's an invention. Specifically, it's an invention of the Industrial Revolution. Factories needed workers at fixed hours. Fixed hours needed fixed sleep schedules. Fixed sleep schedules needed alarm clocks. And alarm clocks needed someone to decide that waking up in the middle of the night was a problem rather than a feature. So if you've ever woken up at 3 a.m. completely calm, thoughts moving clearly through your mind, not anxious, not restless, just quietly awake in the dark, that isn't insomnia. That's a pattern older than civilization itself, still running, still looking for a fire to tend. Which raises one final question. How do we know this isn't just a historical habit that faded away naturally? What if the science actually proves your body is still wired for it right now? And this is where ancient history stops feeling ancient. Because the strangest part of this story isn't what your ancestors did. It's that your body may still be doing it. In the 1990s, psychiatrist Thomas Ware at the National Institute of Mental Health ran a simple experiment. He placed volunteers in conditions with 14 hours of darkness every day for an entire month. No phones, no television, no screens of any kind. Basically everyone's least favorite vacation. At first, participants slept the way modern people do. One long block, 8 hours. Nothing unusual. But then something shifted. Without being told what to do, without any instruction at all, they naturally divided their sleep into 2 separate periods. First sleep, a quiet waking period in the middle of the night. Second sleep. Exactly the pattern Roger Ekirch had found buried in centuries of historical records. People separated by hundreds of years arrived at the exact same rhythm. One group in medieval villages, the other in a modern laboratory. Same result. Here's the mechanism. During that waking period between sleeps, levels of prolactin increased significantly. Prolactin is a hormone associated with deep calm, reduced anxiety, and a kind of quiet mental clarity most people almost never experience. Participants weren't restless. They weren't lying there catastrophizing about their inbox. They entered a genuinely peaceful state, a different mode of consciousness, one that modern life has almost completely erased. But the evidence doesn't stop there. In 2013, researchers published a study in Current Biology involving people who spent just 1 week camping without artificial light. No electricity, no $4,000 wellness retreat charging you for the privilege of sleeping outside. Just 7 days. That's it. Their melatonin cycle shifted nearly 2 hours earlier. The body reset itself, almost immediately, as if it had been waiting the entire time for permission to go back. 300,000 years of biological programming still sitting there, underneath the screens, underneath the alarm clocks, underneath everything modern life stacked on top of it. You need rain sounds on Spotify to fall asleep. Your ancestors needed the sound of fire. You pull a blanket up to your chin before you feel safe enough to close your eyes. They wrap themselves in animal hides. You wake up at 3 a.m. because of a strange noise somewhere in the house. They did too. The only difference is that your unexpected visitor is probably a raccoon. Theirs might have been something considerably worse. Not much has changed, at least not where it matters most. And that's the part that should actually surprise you. Your body didn't forget any of this. It's just been waiting, every single night, for a darkness that no longer comes. And maybe that's the deepest thing to take from all of this. This video was never really about insomnia. It wasn't really about darkness either. It was about humans. More specifically, it was about what humans do when they encounter something they can't control. The night was one of those things. For hundreds of thousands of years, darkness arrived every evening, whether people liked it or not. They couldn't stop it. They couldn't negotiate with it. So they adapted. They turned fire into a classroom. They turned stories into memory. They turned waking in the middle of the night into a moment for reflection. Human beings are remarkably good at building meaning out of things they can't control. That's kind of our thing. Give us enough time, and we'll turn almost anything into culture. Even darkness. Now think about where you are right now. Maybe you're sitting on a couch. Maybe you're lying in bed. Maybe you're watching this on a phone while pretending you're about to go to sleep. We've all done it. Your ancestors sat beside a campfire. You sit beside a glowing screen. Different technology, same species. The distance between you and them feels enormous. 300,000 years, thousands of generations, countless inventions standing between that cave and this moment. And yet, 3 o'clock in the morning arrives. Your eyes open. No alarm, no reason. Just darkness. And a brain that's been doing this for a very long time. Maybe that isn't insomnia. Maybe it's memory. So the next time you wake up at 3 a.m. and can't explain why, don't reach for your phone. Just lie there for a moment and ask yourself what you think ancient humans did best with their nights. Let me know in the comments. I'd genuinely like to know. Sleep well. Or don't. Part of the Stone Age inside you might still have other plans.